My parents chose my brother's birthday over the funeral of my wife and 2 children. When I called them, still shaking from the wreckage, still hearing the echo of my daughter's laughter and my son's tiny hand slipping from mine, my father's voice was ice. "Today is your brother's birthday. We can't come." That was it. No hesitation, no grief. Just a verdict that told me exactly where I stood in their empire of glass and greed. 7 months later, when one headline about me spread across every major news outlet, my entire family panicked, realizing too late that the son they discarded was the very one holding the match that could burn down everything they were ripped. I never wanted revenge, but when you've lost everything, even breathing feels like defiance. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments or tell me where you're from? I love hearing how far my story reaches. It's always good to know I'm not alone in this. Thank you. And now let me tell you everything. And if my story touches you, please subscribe to this channel. Every follow, every click reminds me that my voice, my truth, still matters, even after all I've lost. My name is Jake Walker, and this is my story. I grew up in a palace of glass perched over the Pacific, a house so modern it felt more like a museum than a home. Every evening, the table glittered with crystal glasses, imported wines, and polished silver. My father sat at the head like a monarch, retelling the same story of how my grandfather built Walker Elite Grocerers from a single store in New York into a national empire. The story was recited so often it became a scripture, and we were expected to listen in reverent silence. My younger brother Brandon leaned into it like a prodigy. He tossed around stock figures, expansion strategies, and buzzwords he barely understood. Yet my father applauded him as if he had solved the mysteries of the market. I sat there quietly scribbling meaningless notes, my mind elsewhere. While Brandon bragged about quarterly returns, all I could hear was the crash of waves outside the glass walls. When my father turned to me and demanded I share my vision, I mumbled something safe about luxury without compromise. It was enough to satisfy him, but not enough to silence the voice in me that whispered I was choking. Later that night in his study, my father placed a heavy Swiss watch in my palm. "This is the family's time," he said, fastening it around my wrist. "If you don't wear it, our legacy goes out of sync." The words bound me tighter than the clasp itself. I nodded, pretending to accept the burden, but inside the rebellion brewed. I escaped to the beach after dinner, toes digging into the cool sand. Pulling out the empty notebook I kept hidden, I sketched the horizon line. The memory of childhood burned how he once set fire to my drawings, declaring, "Art won't feed a dynasty." I buried my pencil beneath the sand, whispering to myself that one day I'd dig it back up. Even my mother, polished in her couture dresses and diamond bracelets, seemed like a prisoner in that glass fortress. I caught her once in the music room, eyes swollen, standing beside the piano. When I asked if she was all right, she brushed it off and told me not to disappoint my father. That was the closest she ever came to confession. A few days later, in a New York boardroom, I watched my father humiliate our rivals' Tulsa family markets. He sneered that they sold groceries for the unrefined masses. Behind him, a map glowed with dots marking the cities he planned to conquer. Portland, Houston, Tampa. He spoke of people as markets, neighborhoods, as assets, lives, as percentages. I stared at that map, feeling invisible, as if I too had been reduced to a dot. That night an email appeared on my phone, an acceptance letter from SDSU. My heart leapt, though I hid my smile from the family. It wasn't just a college admission. It was an escape route. At the next family gathering, my father announced to the room, "Jake will study business at SDSU, then return to take his rightful place." "That's settled," I answered with a dutiful, "Yes, sir." But inside another voice rose clear and sharp. "I'll never return the way you expect me to." As I turned away, my eyes caught on my mother's jewelry box. Among the sparkling gems was a modest silver ring engraved with a sunflower. I couldn't explain why I lingered on it, why it pulled at me. It felt like the beginning of a story that hadn't been written yet. I walked back to my room, clutching my empty notebook like a secret promise. SDSU was a different universe. Instead of glass walls and crystal chandeliers, I found worn couches in campus cafes, students hunched over laptops, and conversations buzzing with ideas that had nothing to do with net worth. One afternoon in Love Library, I shifted seats to escape a group dissecting venture capital trends. As I settled in, a pen rolled to my feet. I bent down to grab it, and that's when our hands collided. Her touch jolted through me like a live wire. She smiled, eyes a shade of blue so deep it felt like I was staring into the Pacific itself. "Thanks," she whispered, sliding the pen back into her notebook. A notebook covered in messy arrows, charts, and scrolled words. She caught me looking and turned it toward me. Across the page was written, "Fresh in 36 hours. Every family deserves it." Her name was Ella. She talked about her parents in Tulsa, about a grocery chain built not on exclusivity, but on making good food affordable. She told me her father spent Saturdays handing out free meals to kids who might otherwise go hungry. I listened, stunned, as if someone had flipped my world upside down. For the first time, I met someone who measured success not by margins, but by mouths fed. We were assigned to the same project in our supply chain class. She sketched out a route that could move produce from farm to store within a single day. I added a tracking system that could cut delivery time in half. Our ideas meshed seamlessly like gears clicking into place. That night, we ended up on the beach in La Jolla Shores, sharing greasy burgers and fries while the tide crept close. She laughed when I confessed I liked sitting for hours just to listen to waves. "Then you already understand more about life than most people I know," she teased. The sound of her laughter was the first fresh air I'd breathed in years. When she handed me her notebook so I could copy down a few references, she scribbled her name on the cover, absent-mindedly. Ella Raymond. The moment I read it, my chest tightened. Raymond, my father's sworn enemy. The family he ridiculed in boardrooms, the rival marked on his map of conquest. I walked her back to her dorm, smiling through the turmoil brewing inside me. At her door, she waved casually, oblivious to the weight of her last name. I turned and left, gripping her notebook in one hand and my own empty one in the other. Back in my room, I placed them side by side on my desk. Two worlds lying next to each other, waiting for the collision that was bound to come. I told myself it was just for now, just until I found the right moment. But the truth was, I was already building my relationship with Ella on a secret. I hadn't told her who my father was, who my family was, what empire my last name carried. Every time I looked into her eyes, I felt the weight of that silence pressing down on me. I asked Ben to keep it quiet, too. He shook his head and warned me that secrets don't shrink. They grow until they're too big to hide. I laughed it off, but when I walked away, the words stayed lodged in me like splinters. That week, we met in the cafe on campus to work on our project. Ella laid her notebook on the table, pages filled with arrows and numbers and sketches of farmers and trucks. And she talked about food desserts across San Diego, neighborhoods where children ate out of vending machines because fresh produce never made it to their streets. She was radiant with conviction, speaking with her hands, eyes lit with a fire I didn't have a word for. I built charts and coded simulations while she drew loops and circles around the words, "fresh in 36 hours." I wasn't Jake Walker with her. I wasn't a son with a family name as heavy as stone. I was simply a young man who wanted to listen, who wanted to believe that the world could be better. But the Walker world always crept back in. One night I answered a video call from Laguna Beach. My father's face filled the screen, sharp and cold as the glass walls behind him. He laid out the next wave of expansion, a calculated march into Portland and Houston. "Tulsa is already finished," he said flatly. It's only a matter of time before their name fades under our lights. I muttered something about exams and disconnected early heart pounding. The guilt of lying to Ella swelled inside me. Later that evening, on the dorm stairs, Ella showed me a framed picture of her family in Tulsa. Her parents stood in front of their small store, her father holding a basket of vegetables, her mother laughing as children crowded around her for free sandwiches. Ella spoke about their program for feeding kids every weekend, her voice soft but proud. I squeezed her hand and forced to smile. The words I wanted to say, "My father is the man who swore to crush your family," stuck like lead in my throat. That night in my room, I lay staring at the ceiling. One side of my desk glowed with emails from Walker headquarters about acquisitions and legal maneuvers. The other side held Ella's notebook brimming with hope and messy handwriting. I knew I would have to choose. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but the day was coming fast. My phone buzzed. A message slid across the screen with a photo attached. It was the picture Ella and I had taken on La Jolla shores, her hair tangled from the wind, my arm around her. The caption read, "Dad will want to see this." Signed with a single letter, B. I didn't need to guess who sent it. Brandon had been watching. Almost immediately, another notification appeared. An email from an untraceable address. Just one line. "Don't let them grind Tulsa the way they've ground others." Attached was a scanned document, an internal memorandum outlining tactics to strangle small suppliers. My stomach turned. Whoever sent it knew what I needed to see, and they wanted me to act. I turned my wrist toward the dim light, the heavy watch digging into my skin, its ticking suddenly deafening. I drafted a message to Ella, ready to confess everything. My thumb hovered over send, and then I froze. Down the hall, the elevator chimed. The doors opened, and my mother stepped out dressed simply for once. No diamonds, no perfect smile. Her eyes found mine, and she whispered, "I need to talk to you tonight alone." Before I could answer, the doors closed behind her. My chest tightened. Why was she here without him? What did she need to tell me? I told Ella it was time. She deserved to meet my family, or at least to see the truth of them with her own eyes. I convinced myself that if my mother had shown up in San Diego, there had to be some opening, some chance for understanding. So we drove down to Laguna Beach. Ella wore the simple silver sunflower ring I had given her days earlier. When we walked through the doors of the glass mansion, the air froze around us. The dining room shimmered with marble and candlelight, but there was no warmth in it. My father's eyes locked on Ella the moment she entered. His lips curled sharp as a blade. "So this is the Raymond girl," he said. "Tulsa Family Market's polluting the retail world since the day they opened their doors." His voice was loud enough for the whole table. Ella kept her chin high, but I saw her fingers tremble. I snapped back at him, defending her, but he only laughed. Brandon struck next. With a smug grin, he slid a photograph across the polished table. It was our La Jolla Shores selfie. "How long were you planning to hide this?" he said loudly enough that even the staff paused. I stared at him, rage boiling, and realized he had been following me, waiting for the moment to use it. The room tightened around me. My father stood towering, and with deliberate slowness he unclasped the watch from my wrist. It hit the table with a metallic crack. "You are no longer a Walker," he announced. "Brandon will inherit what matters." The words shattered something inside me. The tick of that watch had been a chain. Now its silence was even heavier. I grabbed Ella's hand and pulled her up. We walked out of the house without looking back. My heart pounded with the rhythm of the waves outside. Waves crashing against the cliffs as if roaring in my ears. I knew this was the final cut. As I passed the door, I heard my mother's voice, faint trembling. "Don't believe everything your father did to Tulsa," she whispered. "There are things you don't know." Before I could ask, her eyes dropped and she turned away. The words hung like smoke, impossible to grasp. Later, back in my apartment, an email arrived in my inbox. It was forwarded from Brandon's account, though I knew he hadn't meant for me to see it. It laid out a plan. Walker Elite would launch a series of lawsuits designed to bankrupt a chain of Tulsa suppliers. My hands clenched the edge of the desk until my knuckles went white. I didn't tell Ella. Not yet. But the fire inside me was no longer just guilt or shame. It was something sharper, something that felt like the beginning of a war. We were married in a small Tulsa church that smelled like old wood and warm bread. Aaron Raymond stood at the aisle with a simple bouquet. Carol Raymond wiped her eyes with the corner of an apron she'd refused to take off, saying she'd come straight from the kitchen. There were no tuxedos, no chandeliers, no Walker guests. The silence of their absence rang louder than any organ. Ella squeezed my hands and smiled anyway, the kind of smile that says we will build our own world. We did. Portland took us in with salt air and gulls and a streak of gray that somehow made the colors we chose matter more. Our apartment looked over the slate sheet of Willamette River, and on the narrow balcony, Ella planted sunflowers in mismatched pots. Every morning they turned their coin-bright faces toward whatever light the city could muster. I took a job at Green Lane, a logistics startup that felt like a brave little boat in a choppy sea. Ella stayed home with Ava and Noah, and in the evenings our living room became a kingdom of paper wings and wooden blocks. Ava loved painting butterflies. She'd put water to color and tap, tap, tap her brush, then announce the species she'd invented as if she'd discovered a new continent. Noah liked to curl a fist around my forefinger and toddle from sofa to window, his breath a soft engine against my wrist. Ella read on the floor between them, bent over paperbacks with a pencil tucked behind her ear, humming under her breath. It sounded like a prayer she trusted more than any I'd heard. At night I wrote. The journal wasn't for posterity. It was a ledger of gratitude, disguised as sentences, a running list of tiny mercies. Noah's laugh when the kettle hissed. Ava's smudge of teal on the fridge. The way Ella before sleep would touch the silver sunflower ring I'd given her and whisper a line from her notebook like a benediction fresh in 36 hours. She believed those words weren't only a dream, they were an assignment. An email arrived from Brandon. Unsentence, no punctuation, all teeth. You're digging your own grave. I deleted it, but my hands tightened on the keyboard until the edges bit my palms. I didn't tell Ella. I told myself our life was too small for their reach, too honest for their games. We picnicked at Mount Tabor Park on a wind-whipped Saturday. Children flew kites that slashed the sky with bright angles. Ella took out her old notebook and showed me the motto again. The loops and arrows leading to a future she could see as clearly as the lake in front of us. It's not just an idea, she said, eyes bright. It's a promise to families who were never invited into the places your father built. The word families stretched inside me like a new room. I wanted to live there. A few days later, a manila envelope appeared in our mailbox with no return address. Inside were photocopies of an internal document describing payments to a freight company, an arrangement that squeezed smaller suppliers out of routes Tulsa needed. The last page was signed with a single initial R. My stomach dropped as if the floor had given way. I slid the pages back into the envelope and shoved it under a stack of tax forms. Ella was bathing the kids, singing off-key. The apartment smelled like soap and wet hair. I told myself I'd show her when I had the right words, when the timing wouldn't shatter the light we'd fought to make. That night I wrote in the journal, and the sentence came out before I could soften it. If one day I lose everything, I'll keep breathing for them. I stared at the line until the ink bled. I closed the book and sat in the dark, listening to the careful, even sound of my family sleeping, and wondered how long good things were allowed to last. Morning came like a vow renewed. We made pancakes, and Ava sprinkled blueberries like stars, announcing constellations only she understood. Noah clapped when the first flip landed clean. Ella kissed my cheek and said the world would get what it deserved if we kept showing up. I told her I'd be home for dinner. She told me to remember the sunflower faces that even in gray they turned. We laughed at the door. I left with that laugh in my pocket, a charm against everything I refused to name. We were driving back from the park, the kind of afternoon that scrapes the city clean and makes even the cranes look like sculpture. The kids were drowsy in their seats, Ava humming without words, Noah snoring in soft bursts. Ella's hand rested on my knee, warm and sure. 1 second the road was a ribbon, the next a truck drifted across the line like a shadow stepping out of a wall. There wasn't time to negotiate with physics. Metal screamed, glass starred and then shattered. The world bent hard to the left. And then there was nothing for a while but a ringing that wouldn't end. I woke to white light and the aftertaste of metal. My right arm was splinted. Something in my ribs complained with every breath. A nurse said my name like a question. Then a doctor said it again, and the way he stood told me everything I didn't want to know. I asked anyway. He didn't use a gentle voice. He used the only one that could carry the weight. Ella, Ava, Noah. He said their names like bells and then let the silence toll. I borrowed a phone because mine was gone or I was afraid to look for it. I called home, the Walker home. My father answered on the second ring, the clatter of glass and laughter riding in behind his words. I told him. He paused. When he spoke, his tone had the smoothness of a boardroom statement. "Today is your brother's birthday," he said. "We can't come." Something in my chest unclasped and fell. In the background, I heard a chorus, happy voices, cutlery a toast. I hung up and the ringing came back louder. Tulsa dressed itself in black and yellow. The church was the same, but everything inside me had been rewritten. 3 caskets rested at the front, 2 small, and one that looked too big not to be a building by itself. Sunflowers lined the aisle and bowed their heads with the mourners. Someone placed Ava's butterfly painting atop her casket. Noah's favorite knit cap was tucked beside his. Ella lay with the silver sunflower ring resting against her collarbone the way she wore it every night before sleep. No one from Laguna Beach came. Linda arrived late, eyes raw, hands shaking. She reached for me and said my name like an apology. But when I asked where he was, she looked down. I told her to go. It wasn't rage that moved me. It was the refusal to be used as proof that we were still a family. Aaron Raymond stood behind me, steady as a door frame. He pulled me into his chest and said, "You're our son. We've got you." I let myself lean. Outside on the steps after the service, I checked my phone and saw a new post from Brandon. Champagne sparklers, a rooftop glow over New York, and a caption that read, "Like a dare." Walker wins. The screen blurred. My hand moved on its own, and the phone hit the concrete, skidding into a line of fallen petals. I didn't pick it up. Ben found me later with flowers that matched the aisle, a simple bouquet of sunflowers that smelled like a clean morning. He handed me an envelope with a note inside. 1 sentence in his blocky handwriting. "You're their family. Don't quit on yourself now." I didn't cry. There was nothing left in me to pour out. But I felt something else tiny, stubborn, stir in the rubble. Back at the house that evening, Carol Raymond pressed a warm loaf into my hands and told me to eat. And when I couldn't, she left it anyway. I sat in the room that had been set for me where they kept an extra blanket because they never stopped expecting me to show up. I opened the box with the few belongings the hospital had returned. Among them was Ella's notebook bent at the corners and a folded slip of paper caught in the spine I had never seen before. In her handwriting, "If they take everything, use this dream as your weapon. You are my whole world. Keep going." The words didn't heal me. They aimed me. The next morning, a message arrived on a number I'd only just reclaimed. No name, just the line. "If you want to bring Walker down, start in Portland. Begin where he thinks nothing can fall." It was signed the same way the freight memos had been. R. I stared out the window at the hill where the church roof cut the sky. Sunlight touched the rows of stones like the pages of an open book. I closed my eyes and saw Ella's ring catching the same light. Grief didn't turn me into someone new. It stripped me down to who I already was when no one was watching. I wasn't the heir to anyone's throne. I was a man with empty arms and a promise burning like a pilot light that refused to go out. I pressed my palm to my chest where her necklace had rested. And I made another entry in the journal, though my hands shook so hard the letters wandered. I wrote that I would keep breathing for them, and I would take what was left of my life and aim it at the thing that had stolen so much from so many. Then I set down the pen, and for the first time since the crash, I inhaled fully and let the air stay. The invitation came as a shock, an email from my father, not in his usual clipped commands, but in words that almost trembled. He asked to see me at the Copley Plaza in San Antonio. I read it twice, waiting for the sneer to appear between the lines, but all I found was the scent of desperation. I boarded a flight the next morning, carrying nothing but a folder of documents I had collected for months, and the necklace with Ella's sunflower ring pressed against my chest. The Copley Plaza's meeting room was gilded and warm chandeliers humming with golden light. Public garden glowed behind the glass like an illusion of calm. My father stood at the far end of the table, taller than I remembered, but diminished somehow. There were shadows under his eyes. He gestured for me to sit. "Walker Elite is in crisis," he admitted. The words almost broke him. "Courageous investors have pulled out. Brandon's last campaign collapsed. But you, Jake, you can steady the ship. You're still my son." His voice might have sounded paternal to anyone else, but all I heard was the echo of the call from the hospital, the words that had gutted me. "Today is your brother's birthday. We can't come." I leaned forward, my throat tightening, and threw them back at him. "That's what you told me when I buried my family. That's who you are. Not a father. Not to me." His hands shook. "You don't understand the weight I carry." "I understand enough," I said. From my briefcase, I drew the files I'd been saving: contracts, internal memos, records of payments, evidence of the chokeholds he had placed on suppliers across the country. I spread them across the mahogany table like a deck of knives. "You didn't just abandon me. You crushed families who only wanted to live. Tulsa was just one name on a list. You called it business. I call it ruin." He stammered, mouth opening and closing, but not once did the word sorry pass his lips. Not once did remorse soften his eyes. I realized then that I had been chasing an apology that would never exist. I stood, pulled the old watch from my jacket pocket, the one he had stripped from me years ago and that I had picked up again after the funeral only to remind myself of its weight. I set it down on the pile of papers. The tick was faint but insistent. "This is your inheritance, not mine. I won't wear your time any longer." At that moment, a wave of movement swept through the room. Phones buzzed, screens lit up. CNBC was broadcasting live. Brandon's face filled the monitors, strained and shiny with panic as he tried to defend the company to shareholders. Behind him, a banner read, "Walker Elite teeters on the brink." The investors in the plaza room began to stand one by one, filing out like a tide leaving the shore. The empire was crumbling, and for the first time I felt free. I turned to leave. My father's voice, ragged, followed me. "You will always be a Walker." I paused at the doorway, looked back, and touched the necklace at my chest. "No," I said. "I'm Jake, the man Ella trusted, not a Walker." Out on the steps, my phone rang. Ben's voice crackled with excitement. "You did it. He's finished. But Jake, don't forget someone else has been watching you all along. R hasn't shown their face yet." The city lights burned against the dark sky. For the first time, the chains of my name had fallen away. But another presence waited in the shadows, a reminder that freedom always comes with vigilance. 3 years later, I stood on the hill above Tulsa, where the cemetery met the horizon. The oaks blazed red with autumn, and the air carried the smell of warm bread from a bakery down the street. In my hand was a bouquet of sunflowers. I laid them gently across 3 stones and whispered, "I did it, Ella. Everyone eats well now, just like you dreamed." The wind rose, carrying that bakery scent through the leaves. For a moment it felt like she was whispering back. Aaron Raymond had retired and passed me the mantle of leadership. Tulsa Family Markets was now more than a chain of stores. It was a movement, an idea turned solid. On the walls of our headquarters hung not awards or profit charts, but crayon drawings made by children whose lives we touched. Fresh in 36 hours wasn't just a slogan, it was a lifeline. We hosted a Farmers' Day festival that summer. Kids lined the sidewalks with chalk, their laughter spilling across the market stalls. We handed out apples, baked bread, and painted faces with butterflies. I gave out scholarships from the Ella Fund, named in her honor, to children who might one day build their own brighter worlds. Mia Thomas joined us that day. She had left Walker Elite before it sank completely and chose to build here instead. She shook my hand and said, "I'd rather work for someone with a heart than someone with a throne." Back in my office, I opened a letter that had arrived with a Tulsa postmark. A single mother from Houston had written thanking me for the store that allowed her son to eat fresh fruit every day. "He loves apples now," she wrote. "He says he feels strong." I folded the letter slowly and closed my eyes. I saw Ava holding a painted butterfly up to the light. Noah toddling toward me with his hand outstretched. I felt their presence as clearly as the ink on the page. At home, Aaron Raymond and I worked side by side in the garden. Carol Raymond taught me how to knead dough until my hands carried the same memory of flour hers did. I stopped writing in the journal. I didn't need to trap life on paper anymore because I was living it fully without fear of it slipping away. One evening, a plain envelope arrived at my office. Inside was a single sheet with a line scrolled in rough handwriting. "The Walkers aren't the only enemies. Keep watch. R." I smiled faintly and slid it into a drawer. It didn't rattle me. Not anymore. I had learned that life wasn't about hiding from threats, but about knowing who you are when they arrive. That night I sat on the Raymond porch, the fields spread out in gold around me. The sunflowers bent toward the last of the light. I held the necklace in my hand and whispered, "I didn't survive to destroy. I survived to be real." From the garden, children's laughter rose bright and full, stitching itself into the evening air. I closed my eyes and let the wind carry the smell of fresh bread into the night, a sign that the dream we built still breathed and would go on. Peace had settled into my bones like a long, ited season, but peace never comes without shadows. In the months after the plaza collapse, Walker Elite's name vanished from the headlines. Brandon disappeared from the stage, his face now attached to failed ventures and whispered debts. Charles moved quietly to a house in Palm Springs, stripped of the boardrooms and podiums that had once kept him alive. I thought that was the end of the dynasty, but endings are never that clean. At Tulsa Family Markets, the rhythm of work carried me forward. Farmers' hands shook mine. Mothers thanked me at checkout lines, and children with apples-stained smiles ran through the aisles. The Ella Fund expanded, reaching Cleveland, Sacramento, Orlando, even whispers of new branches abroad. I threw myself into the mission, into honoring the words she had written. Use the dream as your weapon. One evening, as I walked through the office after everyone had gone home, I found an envelope on my desk. No stamp, no signature. Inside was a photocopy of an article draft. The headline read, "The Heir Who Burned His Own Empire." The paragraphs painted me as a vulture who betrayed his bloodline, portraying Tulsa's rise as nothing but revenge dressed as charity. At the bottom was the same mark I had seen before, R. I stared at it for a long time. My pulse thudded, not with fear, but with a recognition I couldn't shake. This wasn't Brandon's style. He craved spotlight, not shadows. This was someone else. Someone who had fed me documents, warnings, breadcrumbs. They weren't finished with me. That night I drove to the cemetery. I sat before the stones, the sunflowers I had left already bowed in the evening air. "They're trying to pull me back into the war," I whispered. "But I won't lose myself again." The wind carried the smell of bread from the town below, as if answering, reminding me of what mattered. Still, I couldn't ignore it. If R had the power to topple my father, what did they want now? The next day, Mia Thomas stepped into my office with a hesitant look. She handed me her resignation letter, but not before saying, "Be careful, Jake. Not everyone who claims to help you wants you to succeed. I've seen too many files move through hands I don't recognize." She left before I could ask more. That night, I reread Ella's final note. "If they take everything, use this dream as your weapon." It no longer felt like a warning. It felt like permission. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and made a vow. Whoever R was, whatever they wanted, I would not let them define me the way my father once did. My name was no longer theirs to use. My story belonged to Ella, to Ava, to Noah, and to the people who now carried our dream forward. Peace was fragile. Yes. But I had learned to live with fragility, to hold it carefully like a sunflower that always turned its face toward the light. Spring returned to Tulsa in waves of green. On the hill where the oaks shaded the graves, the Ella Fund held its first community festival. Children painted butterflies on canvas that fluttered in the wind. Farmers sold bread and fruit at long tables, and the air pulsed with music from a local band. I walked among them not as a CEO or a survivor, but as a man whose life had been broken and remade in fire. Aaron Raymond leaned against the stage, smiling, his hands folded like a man who had finally laid his burdens down. Carol Raymond bustled among the booths, pressing extra rolls of bread into the hands of children who had already eaten. Mia Thomas returned too, not as an employee, but as a guest. She caught my eye and mouthed only 2 words. "Still here." In the middle of it all, a little girl tugged at my sleeve. She held out a picture, 3 figures drawn in crayon, a tall one with dark hair, a woman with yellow flowers for eyes, and 2 children holding butterflies. "This is your family," she said. "Matter-of-factly, they're still with you." I knelt, unable to speak, and took the drawing as if it were scripture. Later that evening, when the crowd had thinned and the sky glowed copper, I sat again on the Raymond porch. The sunflowers swayed gently, their heads heavy but unbowed. I held the child's drawing and felt the necklace warm against my chest. A final envelope had arrived that morning, slipped under my office door. I hadn't opened it yet. I laid it on the porch table, staring at it until the edges blurred. Maybe inside was another warning, another reminder that enemies still lingered. Maybe it was a test. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to open it immediately. I let it sit untouched. Because my story was no longer about the battles my father started or the games others played in the shadows. My story was about bread-shared children fed sunflowers leaning toward the light. I whispered into the dusk, "I didn't survive to fight forever. I survived to love, to build, to remember." The wind rose again, carrying the scent of bread from town. Children's laughter echoed from the fields, and for the first time I felt the word legacy, not as a crown or a curse, but as something simple, human, and